silence. They wanted fireworks. They wanted the explosion, the scream, the chaos. They were begging for a scene to point at, to laugh at, to whisper about later. But I gave them nothing, not a glance, not a twitch, not even the mercy of anger, just silence. And it burned them more than any outburst ever could. Because silence isn't absence, it's a mirror. And in that mirror, they saw themselves unraveling. The harder they pushed, the quieter I became. The louder their voices rose, the sharper their jokes cut, the more I vanished into stillness. And that stillness crushed them. It stripped their laughter of its power, turned their insults into echoes that fell flat against the walls. They wanted me to play their game. They wanted a reaction they could feed on. But I don't feed anyone. I starve them. That's the thing no one understands. Power doesn't live in the noise. Power lives in restraint, in holding back when the world demands a crack, in smiling when they expect you to break. And when you give them nothing, when you refuse to bleed for their entertainment, you force them to bleed themselves dry. That's why they blinked first. That's why their confidence trembled, their jokes stuttered, their courage slipped away. I didn't have to strike, I didn't have to fight. All I had to do was sit in the storm and let them drown in their own noise. My silence was the punchline, my silence was the weapon, and deep down they knew it. They asked for chaos, I gave them emptiness, and emptiness was enough. They gathered closer, like vultures circling a body they swore was about to die. Their voices sharpened, their eyes searched, their grins stretched too wide. They thought if they pressed hard enough, if they hit the right nerve, I'd finally crack. They wanted that flicker of rage, that slip of weakness, that single spark they could turn into fire. But all they found was a void staring back. The louder they became, the smaller they looked. Their laughter shook, thin and fragile, bouncing off walls that didn't answer. Every insult they spit turned sour in their own mouths. Every taunt came back to them heavier than it left. They weren't mocking me anymore. They were begging me, begging for something, anything, to prove their noise mattered. And I gave them the same gift I always give. Nothing. That's the cruelty they never prepared for. You can fight a scream. You can resist a fist. You can even stand against fire. But how do you fight nothing? How do you win against silence? You can't. You burn yourself out chasing it, clawing at it, until exhaustion eats you alive. That's the truth they started to taste as their voices cracked and their faces fell. They weren't draining me, they were draining themselves. And while they withered, I watched, calm, still, unmoved, my silence wrapped tighter around them than any chain could. They didn't know it yet, but the reaction they wanted was already happening. It just wasn't happening in me, it was happening in them. They were the ones unraveling piece by piece under the weight of my absence. I never lifted a finger. They broke themselves, and I laughed quietly where only I could hear it. It started small, a sideways glance, a muttered word under the breath. The same people who stood shoulder to shoulder against me suddenly looked at each other like enemies. My silence had done what their shouting never could. It cracked their unity. They wanted me to be the target, but with nothing to hold on to, they turned their claws inward. One blamed another for not being sharp enough, loud enough, cruel enough. Another accused the rest of weakness, of failing to get under my skin. The noise that once came at me now split into fragments, bouncing back and forth between them, jagged and poisonous, and I watched as the cracks spread faster than they could cover. Their grins vanished, their voices dropped, no longer confident, no longer united. The bravado dissolved into suspicion. Who would break first? Who already had? Who was secretly afraid? I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Every ounce of doubt that infected them came from the silence I refused to break. It was my laugh without sound, echoing in their heads, making them question everything, including each other. And so the betrayal began. Jokes turned into accusations. Allies became opponents. They clawed at each other, desperate to prove who still had control. But the truth was obvious. None of them did. They were shadows fighting shadows, tearing themselves apart in the dark, while I sat motionless, untouched, unbothered, unseen. That's the power they never understood. I didn't need to fight them. I just let them fight themselves. My silence wasn't a shield. It was a blade. And it cut deeper than any scream ever could. The room was collapsing, and I hadn't moved an inch. They shouted over each other now, desperate, frantic, voices clawing for control that no one had. Their laughter was gone, replaced with cracked throats and trembling hands. The show they tried to put on for me had turned into a war they couldn't escape. And all the while, I sat in the corner of their minds, quiet, smiling, untouchable. One stormed off. Another broke into nervous laughter that no one joined. The strongest one, the loudest, the boldest, was the first to falter. His voice cracked, his eyes darted, his words stuttered. He wanted me to rise, to scream, to prove him right. But I stayed still, and in that stillness he broke. The others saw it, and panic spread like fire in dry grass. If he could fall apart, what chance did the rest of them have? They wanted me to be the spectacle. Instead, they became it. Every crack in their unity was now a canyon. Every whisper was a blade. They lashed out at each other, tripping over their own words, desperate to find a reaction anywhere, even if it meant destroying themselves. My silence wasn't just haunting them anymore. It was consuming them, twisting every thought, every doubt, every fear, until there was nothing left but chaos. And I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. That's the beauty of nothing. It requires no effort. They did all the work for me. They dug their own graves with their own hands, convinced they were burying me instead. I didn't win by fighting. I won by vanishing. And still, they couldn't escape me, because silence doesn't end when the noise dies. Silence is what's left when everything else is gone. They thought silence was weakness. They thought it was fear. But silence was evolution. In the middle of their collapse, in the ashes of their noise, I felt it, sharp, electric, undeniable. The shift, the moment where I stopped being their victim and became their reflection. They screamed, I whispered, they clawed, I smiled, they bled, I stayed whole. That was the birth, not of a survivor, not of a hero, but of something they couldn't cage. I realized then I never needed to rise to their level. Their level was dust, fragile, temporary. Mine was absence, untouchable, permanent. They wanted a reaction. I gave them emptiness, and that emptiness grew fangs. It wasn't silence anymore. It was presence. A presence so heavy, so undeniable, that even when I wasn't there, the room still bent around it. That's when I knew I had become the storm without a sound. The greatest trick isn't laughing when they expect tears. It isn't smiling through the pain. It's standing still while the world bends first. They blinked, they cracked, they folded, and all I did was nothing. That's power. That's the joke. That's me. And if you're still here, listening, feeling that chill under your skin, you've already joined the silence. Don't just watch from the shadows. Step inside, subscribe, or don't. Either way, you've already heard me. And once you've heard silence, you never unhear it. The silence grew teeth. It didn't just sit in the air. It spread, coiling around their throats, tightening with every breath they wasted. I didn't speak, but they heard me anyway. Every second I stayed quiet, the weight pressed harder. It was no longer absence, it was pressure. The kind that makes lungs burn and hands shake. They thought they could ignore it, but silence doesn't let you ignore it. Silence demands attention, louder than any scream. They shifted in their seats, eyes darted to the floor, to the ceiling, to anywhere but me. The ones who once tried to dominate the room suddenly couldn't meet their own reflection. They felt me without looking. They felt me without sound. It was like a shadow stretching across every corner, a storm they couldn't see but knew was there. And the cruelest part? I didn't lift a finger. All of this, every twitch, every nervous swallow came from nothing, from me choosing nothing. That's when it hit them. I wasn't silent because I was broken. I was silent because I was whole. I wasn't holding back. I was holding everything. Their chaos, their doubt, their fear, all of it caged behind my grin. And when you realize that someone doesn't need to fight to win, You stop seeing them as human. You start seeing them as inevitable. The shift was complete. They weren't mocking me anymore. They weren't testing me. They were waiting for something, anything from the silence they couldn't control. They wanted noise to save them. I gave them nothing again. And somehow it was louder than before. It seeped into them, slow, invisible, unstoppable. My silence wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in their veins. Every glance they avoided, every breath that came too fast, every word that died in their throat. It was me. They carried me like a sickness, and the cruelest part, there was no cure. You don't cure silence, you endure it until it eats you alive. They laughed once, nervously, trying to break it, but the sound shattered like glass, brittle, wrong, out of place. They didn't laugh again. Their voices lowered, cautious, as if speaking too loudly might wake something already awake. Even their movements slowed, each step calculated, like prey that knows the predator is near. And still, I hadn't moved, not an inch. That's what they never understood. Noise burns fast. It flashes, it fades. But silence lingers. It sticks under your skin. It drips into your thoughts. It rewrites the way you see the world. They weren't afraid of me. Not really. They were afraid of the reflection I forced them to see. The weakness they tried to bury under noise, the emptiness they carried when the performance ended. I just held up the mirror and let them crumble. By then, the room wasn't a room anymore. It was a cage, and I wasn't trapped inside with them. They were trapped inside with me. My silence filled every corner, every shadow, until it wasn't space they were standing in. It was me, the void, the grin, the storm that doesn't roar. And the longer I stayed still, the more they realized this wasn't going to end with words. It wasn't going to end with screams. It wasn't going to end at all. By then, I wasn't silent. I was silence. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was the throne I sat on, the crown they built for me with their own fear. Every second I stayed still was another reminder that I didn't need to fight for control. I already had it. They gave it to me the moment they blinked first. Their world bent around me without a sound. Eyes that once mocked me now avoided mine like a blade. Voices that once challenged me now broke into whispers, soft and uncertain. The strongest in the room, the ones who lived on noise, were the first to crumble. Because when the noise dies, the loudest become the weakest. And I was the one who killed the noise without lifting a finger. I could feel it radiating, this new dominion. It wasn't chaos, it wasn't fury, it was order. My order. The kind of order that doesn't need rules or laws because it's written in their nerves, in the weight pressing against their lungs. They obeyed without knowing they obeyed. They surrendered without ever hearing me say a word. That's not power you take. That's power you become, and it was beautiful, watching them drown in something they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. I didn't need chains, I didn't need weapons, I didn't even need to laugh. The silence laughed for me. It devoured every corner, every thought, until all that was left in the room was me and the echo of what they used to be. So I sat still, smiling, untouchable, the joker without a punchline, because the joke had already been told, and they were living in it. It followed them long after the room had emptied. My silence wasn't trapped between walls. It bled into their bones, into their dreams. They carried me home in the corners of their eyes, in the tension of their shoulders, in the way they couldn't sleep without hearing the echo of nothing. I didn't need to be there anymore. I was already everywhere. The streets, the alleys, the whispers, they all shifted when I walked through, or even when I didn't. My absence had weight. My stillness had momentum. I didn't have to show up for the room to change shape. It bent itself preemptively, waiting, fearing, adjusting to a presence that might never arrive. That's the kind of power silence breeds, not immediate, not explosive, but permanent. They saw me in shadows where I didn't stand. They heard me in pauses where no words lived. They felt me in the hollow of every joke they didn't dare finish. That's when I realized I wasn't just in control of the moment. I was in control of memory itself. They couldn't escape me because I had become the thing they couldn't stop remembering. Their laughter had died, their noise had failed, their strength had cracked. And still, I never raised my voice, not once. All I did was blink slower than them, and it was enough to turn me into the ghost of their every silence, the storm that never broke but never ended. I didn't haunt them with violence, I haunted them with nothing, and nothing was everything. This is what you asked for, don't lie. You wanted a reaction, a crack, a scream, a fight you thought you could win. You pushed, you mocked, you laughed, thinking the noise was power, but you were wrong. I didn't give you what you wanted, I gave you nothing, and that was enough to end you. Look at me now, no fury, no chaos, no blood on my hands, just silence. The kind that crushes louder than any roar, the kind that leaves no room for argument, no room for escape. I didn't need to destroy you. You destroyed yourself the moment you realized you couldn't break me. You blinked first. That's all it took. I never needed to raise my voice. I never needed to move. I just sat there, smiling, watching the world fold in on itself. Because that's the truth you can't accept. I don't need to act to win. I just need to exist. And existing without fear, without apology, was enough to crown me king of nothing, and nothing is everything. So here's the punchline. You wanted control, you lost it. You wanted to laugh, you choked on it. You wanted me broken. Instead, you built me. And now, every silence you hear, every pause that chills your spine, it's me. Forever. I am the storm you never heard coming, the shadow you never saw leave, the silence that doesn't end, and no matter how far you run, you'll never outrun nothing, because nothing is already here.